Hi, my name is Katina Michael, and today I'll be talking to you about comparative mobile technology responses to COVID-19. I direct the Society, Policy and Engineering Collective at Arizona State University, and I'm part of the School for the Future of Innovation in Society and also have a joint appointment in the School of Computing, Informatics and Decision Systems Engineering. So, why have we traditionally sought after ubiquitous biosurveillance technologies over the last number of decades in response to national crises? In this instance, we're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so over time, what we've seen is the adoption of various kinds of technologies in the hope that we could reduce disease, reduce epidemics, and also reduce pandemics. Now, if we look at the different types of technologies historically that we've used, we can date back to SARS, we can look at avian, the swine flu, MERS, and now COVID-19. And so we've used a number of different technologies in order to try and reduce transmission rates. Interestingly, what we've seen is governments attempting over the last 20 years, when there's been a proliferation of advanced communication technologies and storage technologies, to take people through what is known as a digital transformation process. In fact, many governments across the world have a digital transformation agency that's basically going through from manual techniques to more automated techniques and taking people through this process of change. You know, the world doesn't freeze with the creation of new technologies. There's no lockdown, change, and then unfreeze. And what we're seeing is this proliferation of devices and artifacts. And sometimes we're getting lost in the technologies rather than learning through coordination efforts what we might need to do together as a community. And so the major issues when citizenry look on to national level kinds of deployments of technology are the past woes and the past experience, the past behaviors of government, and those kinds of cataclysmic failures that have occurred in various countries to do with taxation or health records or you name it. And so the main issues people are concerned about are things like privacy and cybersecurity, their rights in terms of their own data and where that data might end up once collected, and trust. Interestingly, the government has adopted the innovator hat really in this particular process of COVID-19. And what they've said is we have to react, we have to do something. But governments have chosen to react in very different ways. Some have waited, paused, and thought, what is the best way forward here? What kinds of technologies might we consider in fighting COVID-19? In other cases, we've seen ally states actually work together, use each other's kinds of coding in open source. And in other cases, we've seen sort of a public-private partnership occur where governments have mandated that companies support them in the bid to create an app. There's an app for that is something that we've all considered. But this is the first big occasion, I think, worldwide, where governments have relied on enterprise to actually come to the table to support them in the development of something that will be distributed and diffused to the public at large. And what we're seeing is a movement towards public interest technology, which is about care. It's not about profit. It's not about generating new revenue through these apps. It's about how can we securitize our society so that we can stem the onset of the pandemic and get people healthy again and get the community going. But this selection environment just keeps growing and growing. You know, technologies literally can be released overnight these days. At least software can be, software as technology and as a service. And the allure of the shiny gadgetry makes us jump straight to actually looking at technology as a solution in the more modern, complex sense, rather than looking at technology as a process, technology as a coordination effort, technology as a definition of how people interact in an environment in a socio-technical sense. And so we do have these manual kinds of techniques that have been instituted. Keep your distance, you know, don't go closer to people than 2 meters. We have been told that we should wash our hands more frequently and for longer periods of time, at least 20 seconds, using soap or other sanitization products. And then we're told that quite possibly pandemics or epidemics could be reduced from between 30% and 70% if hand washing and the cleaning of surfaces was conducted. That is a statistic that was quoted to me by a doctor who was involved in the Cochrane collaboration back in 2008. So we've known these things. We've known if we wear personal protective equipment, we could curb the spread of viruses. And of course, these are certified masks, not just any mask with certain types of material. But we've still got manual contact tracers saying they are the most effective at curbing pandemic spreads. So you'll get a knock on the door if you've had a case of testing positive to COVID. You'll be asked, who have you frequented? Have you been on public transport? Who have you come into contact with? And sometimes it's just your family, so everyone else in the family is tested, but other times it could be colleagues in the workplace or public transport. And so quite interestingly, the first apps, if you want to call it like this, they were mobile alert systems on feature phones, actually took place around the time of SARS. I do remember one of these applications in Hong Kong that would alert you if you were coming within 1 kilometer of a SARS-infected building. There were other solutions. For example, this one, this is just representative, but a wristband that was advocated by the Singaporean government, again, near the time of SARS, because the economy was crippling and travel was coming to a halt. And so when travel comes to a halt, usually opportunity comes to a halt, and there is adverse effects on the economic brightness of a nation. And so these wristbands were introduced both at the local level, also in hospitals for contact and trace. And now we're seeing the resurgence of wristbands again in Hong Kong to ensure that people who have been moving around actually do isolate for a period of at least 2 weeks. But then we've seen the introduction of Bluetooth-enabled protocols on handset apps that allow smartphones to act as a relative position system. So if you come into contact with others and you've come into a proximity of between 2 and sort of 9 meters, failing any sort of blockage by cement or marble or other surfaces, you actually will get a read on most phones at least a quarter of the time if you're using particular types of Bluetooth protocols. They haven't been incredibly effective all the time. In fact, some of the apps have had to run in the foreground, some of them have had bugs, but it is a step in the direction of digital transformation. A lot of governments have invested so much effort into making their apps work that even when they've been abandoned by the general public, they're still innovating and upgrading these apps, would you believe? So Bluetooth enables contact tracing. It's relative position. It's when you've come into contact with someone or nearby between 2 and 9 meters. But the more perhaps sophisticated approach is to use location tracking. That's the absolute location on the Earth's surface, not just your relative position to somebody else. And that location tracking in some jurisdictions has been considered fairly invasive and at odds with privacy legislation. But it does allow for a chronicle to take place, as we've seen in countries like South Korea and otherwise, where we've been told we know exactly where the person has gone, we know who they came into contact with, because it's location and contact tracing, not just one or the other. We're also seeing the introduction of quick response codes. These are computer images that save your personal information, like your phone number, email, and timestamp on a web form. But a lot of people are saying, it's been mandated to businesses to know whether I'm checking in or checking out of that location. Perhaps it's also a public swimming pool, a whole host of areas. But the question is, where is that data being stored? And at the moment, it's being stored in one of 3 places. The government agency that's collecting it, if they're governing the app, the retail supermarket company, if they're governing the app in a shopping mall, and in the third instance, it may well be even a company that specializes in the collection of data, and who knows how that data might be used. The country of New Zealand is encouraging the storage of this data onto the mobile handset of the end user, so there's no issue there. But what happens when we start to think about location and contact tracing? Well, in this instance, we're demonstrating and showing a possibility where you're geo-fenced into your home. it's almost like serving a sentence from home, but it's just for 2 weeks because you've been asked to quarantine after coming from another nation state. And so this is self-isolating in effect, and there's a minimum bounded rectangle outside your vicinity, let's say up to 100 meters from your home, and the location sensor in your smartphone denotes whether you're traversing outside that zone or not, you're remaining within the geofence zone or not. A lot of people find this an interesting question, whether government should have the right to do that or whether they should just trust citizenry to do the right thing. Well, what we know is that people's batteries have gone dead in their house and they've received a knock on the door from authorities saying, where have you been the last couple of hours? And the person has woken up, said, my phone hasn't charged, and they're left alone. But in fact, because the battery has gone dead over a few days or a morning, they are basically questioned about their whereabouts. And if they're found to be denying self-quarantine or self-isolation, then they may get one of these. This is a GPS bracelet that's placed around the anklet. It's an electronic monitoring device, usually being used for pedophiles or those on extended supervision orders. And what happens is the individual who's been denying these self-isolation rules is told, well, if you can't actually do this on your own, we'll monitor you and make sure you're doing it. We've also had ANPR, automated number plate recognition, occur in places like New South Wales in Australia, where the direction of your travel and whether you're going to an essential service has been logged, particularly during the Easter holidays in 2020. And this uses optical character recognition on your number plate. So ANPR being instituted with OCR to denote your direction of travel, even to know that you're doing the right thing. We've also seen from the Melbourne Police the introduction of drones overhead to cause a chilling effect and to monitor, for instance, most recently, whether in the second wave of COVID in Victoria, people were congregating in backyards to watch the Australian Football League Grand Final. So we even have drones that have a limited battery life being used to surveil from above. We've had the introduction of Fitbits in a way to look at condition monitoring. So we've got location, we've got contact tracing, and now we even have condition monitoring. And this is to show the early onset of COVID. Right at the beginning, if someone has been feeling fine, they've been sharing their data, it seems very much the same day in, day out, and then there's an exception. We start to study those outliers and exceptions. So we're pooling all our data together as a community in some studies, for example, at Stanford University with Fitbit, and saying, what can we figure out from the collection of this data? But what's next? I mean, any one of these innovative solutions may well be in the running, but I'd rather us think about social imaginaries. What could we do to better coordinate? What could we do to harness and leverage the power of technology? But to remember that the age-old practice of manual tracing actually still works. But some people have even said, and there's something I'm going to in January, where they're talking about the potential for microchipping people. In some countries like Sweden, train facilities like SJ Rail Company is already offering contactless storage money for people boarding trains. And the question is, well, maybe that's what we should be all doing, maybe this is the way of the future, contactless, and being able to have a non-transferable device that always knows where you are, tethered to your mobile phone. Many people, including myself, think that's a little intrusive, to say the least, but there are some people advocating for these kinds of solutions. So whether we're looking at countries that have just instituted contact tracing, like in Australia, or whether we're looking for location tracking, for example, in China, or whether we're looking for things like studies like that Stanford study looking at condition monitoring, it's all about tagging objects or subjects, human beings, and their property, looking at tracking them throughout a life cycle, and then tracing their end-to-end movement. And we really understand this as uberveillance, this new visibility of almost playing to a global theater where this data is collected and assumptions are made in a predictive manner about the data being collected. So in its guts, it's about control, ensuring that people are doing the right thing and self-isolating when they have to. It's about care, ensuring the reduction of this pandemic virus. And it really is also about convenience, having to check in and check out through this app and this technology and that one and making sure you're carrying everything. What is being proposed here is a simpler mode of communication, and perhaps I would advocate for low tech instead of high tech to ensure that things happen in the right way. If you'd like to contact me, please feel free at katina.michael@asu.edu. I've enjoyed this presentation and thank you for your time.